Actually, I was thinking, how should I introduce Michael? Because there's so much about him, but I'm following him myself for a while already. So I have to say that he's very innovative. He has very interesting point of view always. It doesn't matter what topic he talks about, and he's very straightforward. I have to say. So this is very interesting person to see, to hear. And I see that his topic is also very up to date and very important nowadays. So, Michael, I'm giving the stage to you. I don't want to burn your time, so go ahead.
Thank you, Inga. Thank you so much. Good afternoon for you. Good morning for me here in Boston with the fierce winds. I'm so excited to be the first speaker of the day for this track and welcome you and chat with you on a quest for business agility and what it takes to make an agile transformation work well. Why do they normally fail and what makes them work well? I'm going to share some case studies, my own work with clients over the years, what I've seen works, what doesn't work, and what you can do differently. So very hands-on with several ideas for us to work differently to make agile work, to make lean, to make DevOps work in our organizations. So, first and foremost, I'm going to talk about 3 patterns that make or break agile for an organization, for a team and for organization. And that's simplicity, scalability, and soakability, which, by the way, is not a word I invented, soakability. I like using it. It's a hashtag I've been using now for 2-3 years. So 3 patterns. We're going to talk about simplicity and scalability, soakability as a pattern of success, for agility. So and as Inga mentioned, I talk a lot about Agile. I have a YouTube channel. I talk about Agile, liberating structures. We are living in interesting times and exciting times. Now, COVID has impacted us severely, and we see how we're adjusting to the softer age. So we're at a turning point of an age, and what COVID did is accelerated everything. So with work with my clients, if they would have transformed in 10 years, now they had to do in half a year to a year. So the main thought, and I think you'll hear that from me and from many other speakers today and tomorrow, is that we need to do simple and learn fast. We need to focus on flow, and we need to focus on what I call soakability, inside out, which in Agile we call retrospectives. And if it do, and the DevOps people say, if something hurts, do more of it in organizations to learn more and faster. I use QR codes on the screen, so you don't have to scan, to write or type website. If you want to follow, I'll talk about some books, and I'll give you links. All the links are QR codes. Just snap them with your phone camera, and you'll be able to follow that link. So let's jump right in, right? What makes or breaks an agile transformation? First and foremost, it has to be simple. Whatever you do, it has to be simple. And I've been an agile coach and a consultant for many years now, working globally, working a lot in Europe. And this is a case study. This is a client of mine. I won't share the name. You might know who it is. It's a healthcare company that creates computed tomography systems. They have locations in Europe, in Middle East, in Israel, in the Far East, in India, and in the US. And they have a big engineering organization, engineering as a PMO. We're talking about 14, 13 years ago, top-down PMO, waterfall, FDA regulated, low progress reporting. They weren't very happy with their ability to do capacity planning, and they said, okay, we got to fix this. We got to fix this. So invited me. At the time, I was living in Israel, doing a lot of work in Europe. I had a team of industrial engineers and software engineers. And what they wanted is standardized program management, and project management, and implement a tool for us. So that's what the customer wanted. And what you'll see often, and I'm sure you know that, is that there's a difference between customers want and what they actually need to improve. So the customer wanted this. And the funny thing is that we actually delivered what the customer wanted. But the question is, did we actually solve the problem? So we did. We offered something called Open Workbench to replace their Microsoft project. Who remembers Microsoft Project now? We have Jira, which now becomes almost like Microsoft Projects. I should be saying that. Shh. And it worked with Clarity, which is a portfolio tool. And we delivered what they wanted, a thick book explaining how do you do projects. But then we took a step back, and it took us about 2-3 years, 1,000 engineers all over the world, hardware, software engineers. And we asked ourselves, back view mirror, what was the, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly. What was the bad and the ugly of what we delivered? And I think if you look well into all the PMO transformations, led transformation, that often they offer complex solutions and tools to things that we want to solve in a simple manner. Many times we focus on individual busy work by looking at how much people are working. And we do that with Jira, and we do that with Scrum Masters today as well, by measuring the allocation of people. But we don't ask ourselves, do we improve throughput? For me, it's like the executive asking me as an Agile coach, Michael, we need to increase the velocity of this team. So why don't they commit to more story points? It's the same type of thinking of going to busy work, to managing individuals. And the last thing we asked ourselves, we actually failed, did we make intake management more manageable? And this is a recurring pattern, right? We go and impact an organization, we do a big bang release, big bang top down, and we focus many times on the outputs of the transformation, things that show well, like velocity, rather than the outcomes and the impacts of what we can achieve. And in hindsight, if I had to do all over again this organization, I probably would have selected something much more simple to start with. And we connect this to Scrum and Agile, but actually cadence-based development is the most simple, not easy, simple thing you can do when you adopt a big change across an organization of 1,000. So the simplest thing would have been to say, okay, all engineers now work on a cadence-based delivery. You don't have to do Scrum for it. You don't have to do Agile for it. You can just adopt cadence-based delivery as an example. So a few years later, Scrum came along. And the funny thing about Scrum is, as usual, we're focusing a lot about the events. We're focusing a lot about all the practices. We're focusing on the administrative elements of Scrum rather than the things that increase the outcome. So for me, when an organization asks me, hey, could you make Scrum simple for us? For me, many times it means choosing principles that deliver results. For example, definition of done. I'm a big proponent of definition of done, or perspectives, which for me are usually highly important because you get you to inside out scalability, and swarming, right? The collaboration. So even within Scrum, adopting the full scale sometimes is just too much for an organization to swallow overnight. And maybe we want to ease ourselves in a simple manner. I know there are a lot of maturity models out there, and I like simplicity. There are maturity models out there that ask you 120 questions. There's a big radar. I'm sure you know the big colorful radar maturity model that people like to adopt. I think it's over the top. I think what happens when you're using very complex tools, you're losing the forest for the trees, right? You're losing the ability to see what's going wrong because you're trying to do too much too fast. So if you want to focus on simplicity, and I'll review the other Venn diagrams here later, is really starting by what makes the difference, right? When you talk about team agility, let's focus on simple things that work. Maybe it's definition of done, maybe it's definition of ready. Actually, what I prefer is let the team start, ease themselves. And even if you're now working for Scrum for 3 years and 4 years and 7 years, there's nothing stopping you from taking that team, sitting down and saying, hey, together, hey, what works for us? What are the 3 things we want to improve in the next 3 to 6 months? I'm a big believer of stop starting, start finishing. I'm a big believer of team behavior, such as trust, such as psychological safety. And even if you've been using Scrum for 8, 9, 10 years, there's always this opportunity to take a step back and saying, how agile really are we? How simple are we? What's our simplicity? What are we using in our tools, and what can we do better to make it more impactful for us? So if I'm thinking about these anchors of simplicity, like what is simple and what is not simple, what I've noticed over the years with my clients and with people I've been working with is that the big transformation vocabulary, oh, we're going to change everything. You have PMOs everywhere. We're trying to move everything at once. Usually is not simple and actually fails often. I've been with financial industry companies and they're doing one set. So initially they tried traditional Scrum and then they said, oh, now we need to do the Spotify model. So now everyone's changed to Spotify model and that fails. So now they say, okay, now we have to do less and they're trying to do less. These are all patterns of big transformation that tends to fail. What is simple is actually selecting 3 patterns for a quarter and validating the impact. And in a world that's changing, we have all these VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. Going simple makes a lot of sense. And it's not simple if you focus on efficiency, right? Agile without customer focus, just making the team deliver more. It's not simplicity. Simplicity is practices for high performance, shifting to the left and getting fast customer feedback. It's not simple if you have a PMO driving this, and I've written a book about the Agile PMO. You might have noticed it in the background here. I have the Agile PMO here on my lower left or right, depending if you're seeing a mirror image or not. I've written the book, and even nowadays I'm thinking maybe it's not the right thing to talk about. Maybe this concept of a central top-down command and control to drive agility just doesn't really work. Really, at the end of the day, simplicity is doing simple practices, such as focusing on cadence. And let's add to that a seed of scalability. So simplicity, make things simple, experiment, but all the time, think about from the moment you start, think about scalability. And I think that's one of the biggest caveats, biggest mistakes we make as Agilists when we try impacting team level agility, as we don't ask ourselves, what would it look like on scale? Yes, we go immediately to things like less or DAD, or even, heaven forbid, scaled agile framework. But that's not what I'm talking about, right? I'm talking about, I'll explain in a minute. I'm talking about what does scaling look like for the organization you're working with. So starting a rollout of Agile Scrum or team level agility without thinking, or Kanban, or whatever it is we're doing, or even XP, without asking what would it look like when we scale, is actually already being defeated in the first few weeks of our work. So here's an example from a utility infrastructure company here in Boston, a big company. They have IT projects, infrastructure projects, right? The mainframe, the servers, managing them, moving them, commissioning them, decommissioning them, huge projects, mostly done by vendors. The projects were lasting 2-3 years. They had a lot of scope creep. The PMs and Scrum Master, very low morale. And the work with the vendors were low trust, meaning people just didn't believe the vendors, and vendors didn't believe this IT PMO infrastructure company. So what did the customer want this time? Kind of a recurring pattern when the customer calls you and they say, make it faster using, and they wanted scaled agile because people like scaled agile. I'll talk more about scaled agile in a few minutes. And they wanted lots of documentation, of course, because that's what big clients want. They want documentation. And for some reason, clients like complex solutions. We all like complex solutions because it appears we're doing something. This is like this recurring pattern. We want to do simple, but then we end doing complex because it seems like something is being done when we do complex solutions. So we delivered again. But this time we delivered not what the client wanted, but what they needed. And that was a scalable feedback loop with the vendors. And I'll explain that in a minute. Why, when we talk about scalability, a lot of us think about DevOps scalability, tool scalability. But first and foremost, we need to see if our communication is scalable. Most organizations who are not digital natives have a very tough time with scaling communication. And I'll use a diagram in a few minutes. Kind of a few images to explain what I mean by scaling communication. But first, let's talk more a bit about this. Often, clients confuse the PMO, and you can replace the word PMO with any central mechanism in your organization that drives change. It could be your chapters, it could be your guilds, it could be your release train engineer team, it could be the Agile Center of Excellence, whatever it is that manages. Many times we confuse the adherence to the protocol, and we still do that now, 10 and 20 years after we moved out of project management now to more agility, we still confuse the adherence to protocol with actually getting results. And we confuse scaling of agility and having scalability work for us from day one with actually using a mechanism such as scaled agile framework. Again, that's my pet peeve. I am an SPC, by the way. I do train scaled agile, but we'll talk about this in a few minutes. So I want to focus on about scalability from a concept of not the tools used, because the tools do enable that scalability. I want to talk about scaling bad news. That sounds a bit weird, I know, but in a minute you'll be convinced. So let's talk about the outcome of tool scalability. What's the outcome of having DevOps? The outcome is actually faster propagation of bad news. That sounds counterintuitive, but it really is. So here's what I mean. Let's say you're an individual contributor and something goes really wrong. And you're like, oh my God, right? You're working on something, went really wrong. It's a system, it's a mechanism. It can have really bad impact on your organization. So what do? Well, you try solving it, and then immediately you call your team lead. The team lead, they'll scratch their head and they'll say, you know what, did you try it again? Try it again. And you're like, oh, I'll try it again. And a team lead now, they have to go to their boss, who's probably a director, and say, you know, this probably won't work for a while. The director will say, well, did you check enough? And the director is, you know, they're a bit worried. But remember, the director is already 3 times or 2 times removed from the problem. They don't really know what the problem is. They can't understand if they can join a meeting. But they're not part of the problem domain. So they'll now go to their VP and they'll say, you know, this might not work. And the VP will say, well, did you try 1,000 times? Right? And the VP is like thinking, again, 3 times removed from the problem. Now the VP will go to their senior VP and will say, we need more time. And the VP will say, well, I assume you validated all the scenarios, right? And the senior VPs is already in the green a bit because they're so far removed from the problem. And then the senior VP will go to the CEO and say, well, this could work. And the CEO is hearing what they want to hear, because always executives and, you know, higher ups, they hear what they want to hear. We have this weird quirkiness in our brains. And they'll now go to the board member and say, you know, it works. And the board member will say, we're in the green, and they can IPO and have a lot of money. Now, here's the problem. If you put this on the continuum, the problem that we're seeing is that in traditional companies, this process takes too long. Now, if you think about your company, how long it takes to propagate a failure, it takes too long. But if you think about Facebook, you know, Facebook's not really good in news right now, but they had a down incident, like with their DNS file that they uploaded 2 weeks ago. They were down for 6 hours, 5 hours, and people were like crazy. 5 hours, Facebook went down. Look about the non-scalable organizations, which are most of them. Look at GE, probably at Boeing. Look at the traditional organizations who haven't or not digital natives. This process, propagation of bad news, will take weeks on end. It'll be another PMO meeting. It'll be bring another one. And how do we solve this? And how do you solve this? And if you think about scalability, not from the ability to release software really fast, which is important, but from the perspective of how long it takes us to solve something that goes bad in our organization, how failure propagates, it starts telling us as agile coaches, as scrum masters, as team members, as product owners, where do we really need to start thinking about scalability? How can we make bad news follow fast with psychological safety, with trust in place? So this is really crucial. And again, I'll repeat this. It's not the normal way we think about scalability, because we think about scalability about the tools we have in place and how fast development can do operations and how DevOps is working and how. But even if you get there, right? Even if you release things and then have customers that release clients that release to production really fast, their mindset is still not there. Their mindset is still, oh, if something's not working, we have to have another meeting and another meeting and another meeting. And we don't let the producers, right, the people who are closest to the work, making their own decision to solve things. And then it escalates and it escalates and it escalates. So think about your organization's scalability from how fast it takes to get bad news out. And of course, if you go now to the book, Accelerate of the DevOps, they actually have 4 metrics that I really, really like. So if you want to get to scalability, and again, this is not only about the systems. The systems is the easiest part. Fixing it is the easiest part to fix. And I'm doing now a training for Scaled Agile, and I tell my teams, they're US-based health company, I tell them, no, it's going to take you about 2 to 4 years. And they're like, why would it take us 2 to 4 years to roll out this? And I said, because of people, not because of your systems. You have smart engineers, you have it's the people who will stand in your way to create fast feedback loops, to create mean time to recovery, which is fast, which change failure rate, which is fast. So I love these metrics. And actually, one of the things I recommend my clients is they stop focusing on many metrics and select 4, for example, here. And I love these metrics to see how scalable they are, what's their ability to react fast to bad news, both from market agility and for reliability. And that's the book. That's Accelerate by you probably know Jez Humble. You probably heard him you might have heard him in the past, and Nicole Fersgren and Jim Keem. So yes, it is about the system, but it's also about the system of people that are operating the mechanisms, and how scalable is the mechanisms to convey information. And don't tell me we have Slack, right? Slack is a system. Slack is not any indication of the organization response time. It's a tool, right? So you can adopt Slack, you can adopt Jira. These are nice tools. They work well for us. Do they really solve the problem of the ability to react fast for the company? That's about people and culture. So people say, hey, we're using some of them, big organizations, but there's a lot of debate in the Agile community. Do we like SAFe or we don't like SAFe? And people are upset when people talk about SAFe, and others are not. I've been using SAFe as a toolbox for many years now. I have a love-hate relationship, like many Agilists, with it. My biggest problem in terms of scaling with SAFe is that we create more layers rather than reduce layers, and therefore we don't necessarily increase the fastness or the emergence of bad news. And that's the problem, because the problem traditional organizational, industrial age organization have is that they have a thick mid-level management. I'm sure we've all seen that as Agilists, and this mid-level management thickness is actually acts as a buffer for emergence of bad news. And what SAFe does is that replaces the traditional set with different names. That's my biggest problem. So then when I work with organizations, I often ask them to think through that level. And then one of my friends called it the frozen middle. And that's really a big problem. So yes, you could use SAFe. Yes, I teach SAFe. Yes, I'm an SPC. And yet I'm very cognizant and very make sure that we move away from that very thick layer in the middle. So let's go back to the maturity model I shared with you. I like simplicity. So this is a simple maturity model for business agility. If you want to make agile work, you want to focus on 3 things. Agile work above the team level that's playing with Scrum, right? And sorry for using that terminology, right? But really something that works. I want to have team agility, tech agility, and product agility. So I mentioned team agility. That's the easiest, not right, simple, sometimes easy, sometimes no part. That's where organization immediately focus. Hey, let's go do team agile. But it's really we need it, but it's not enough. In order to get to high team performance, we need tech agile, and many of us forget that. Tech agile is all the software behaviors. If you do agile in software, if you do agile in HR, these are HR know-hows. And if you do in marketing, that's marketing know-hows, right? These are the things that actually make software better, right? Simple design and coding standards and refactoring. You cannot create high-performing teams by focusing on the behaviors of what we call Scrum. And a lot of us make this mistake. So if you want to get to team performance, you have this too. And then people forget that it has to be some product agility, and it's not just the product owners writing backlogs and feeding backlogs and stories to the team. It's much more than that. So things like Lean UX, things like agile intake, hypothesis-driven development, agile roadmap. And without this element of fast feedback from the client, we might be doing things fast, but we're not doing the right thing. So in order to scale agile well, you got to have team agility and product agility. In order to get to DevOps, you got to have tech agility and product agility. If you want to have business agility, you got to focus on all three. And again, often what we do is we start with team agility. We kind of jump a bit to product agility. Yes, we have product owner, but do we really create the feedback loop with our clients? That's really what we want the product owners many times to focus on. And we got to have tech agility, because otherwise everything we're doing is losing the context of what we're trying to focus on. And I've written, you probably have heard Lean Startup. We've taken Lean Startup, the book, and we've made it a comic book. My wife is a digital artist. So if you want to learn more about what product agility looks like outside software, the book is called Chickens Learn Lean, and you can snap the QR code. How do you focus on product agility that leads you to business agility? How about mainstays of scalability? So let's summarize here scalability. What is not scalable and what is scalable? If you're scaling the process and you're pursuing the output of scalability, which is just having more teams, doing more events, doing more ceremonies, if you will, doing more of the same, will not get you to true scalability. If you're scaling the flow and you're pursuing the outcome, which is faster feedback, you'll get to organizational scalability. If you just hire Scrum Masters to be Jira admins, and this is one of the things that just drive me crazy. In the past, we had PMOs and they hired MBA students and they went to meetings and they just took really notes. This happened up until 5 and 10 years ago. We hired people to be note takers from the PMO. This is now moved, and now we have PMOs still hiring Scrum Masters. And the Scrum Masters manage Jira and they become Jira admins. Not very useful, unfortunately. But if you think about Scrum Masters as coaches, because that's what they are. Scrum Masters are coaches, and they're attuned to people, to trust, to working through collaboration, to communication. That is scalable because you've created a decentralized organization. You've given the producers the power to act. The people are working, the software engineers, the power to actually act. And then if you have a mechanism of intake that is HIPPO, highest paid person opinion, or you have a committee doing intake, it's not scalable because you need that committee, and it's more and more and more teams, and you get stuck with long list of things you need to approve or things you need to go to and things you need to review. It is scalable if you work within the small team on evidence-based delivery and you manage the flow of incoming work. Using Kanban often works very well for that. And you can leave it on the team level, that is often scalable. And within the time I have, I want to talk about the third part. We talked about simplicity. We talk about thinking about scalability from day one as the emergence of bad news. Let's talk last about soakability. It has to be contagious. I'm an engineer. I have an engineering, a civil engineer, and I'm an industrial engineer. I have an MBA in engineering. And when I started working initially 20 years ago in production floors, in helping move bottlenecks in supply chains, and now we have all the problems with, what I did, I went to organizations. I looked what they were looking at. I saw the problems. I said, hey, do this, do that. Oftentimes I left a book and I left. And believe me, the next day, they just forgot completely who I was and who was there. Because telling other people how to improve what they're doing, usually people that have much more context than I did, is not soakable, meaning it's not going to stay within the organization. So the McKinsey model, the Boston Consulting Group model just doesn't work in the software age where complexity is very high and only the people who are doing the actual work know the complexity and can solve the problems. And the question is, how do we get to soakability? Lucky for us, this has actually been solved 13 years ago by an amazing book by Mike Rother, the Toyota Kata. And this is about how Toyota makes changes in the organization? How do you manage people for improvement? And we all think about Toyota as lean production and Kanban and Kaizen, which is true. It's true. It's totally true. But this is an interesting story from Mike Rother. And he was in lean for about 25, 30 years. He's based in Munich. And he was part of, in 2008, he was researching for the book. He went with a group of executives from Japan, automotive industry, from Toyota, that visited a plant here in the US in Detroit. And the American executives were all rah, hey, come see what we've done. We have Kanban boards all over the production floor, and we have Andon cords to stop the line, and we have all these digital, beautiful boards, and we have the teams working together, and they're all doing Kaizen, and we have Kaizen events, and everybody's so happy. And the executives from Toyota were looking around, and it was like, well, this is interesting, that we like it, but we're not very impressed. And Mike, the author, was like, why aren't they impressed? The American manufacturing, they did everything, right? It's like everything by the book. And it took him years to understand, and he captured that understanding in the book, that lean manufacturing is not about Kanban boards. It's not about Kaizen events. It's about the process of learning together. And I'll repeat this. We think that if we have a Kanban team, we have a Kanban board, and we use Scrum, we've succeeded. This is not the solution, because the solution is not using Kanban. The solution is not using a Scrum as it was dictated. The solution is, how do we as a team learn together? And that's a profound change, because Toyota at any given point changes the system. And maybe now they're using Kanban, but a year or two from now, they might not, because they found that it's not worth their while. It's not working for them any longer. This is an amazing book, by the way. If you're a Scrum Master, an Agile coach, if you're a team member, if you're a product owner, just grab this book. This is an amazing read, because it teaches the process of learning together. So people tell me, oh, we do retrospectives. We know how to improve. And what usually I see a drunken retrospective is that we meet every 2 weeks, if we do, because, by the way, you all know that retrospective is the first event that we drop, right? It's the easiest. No, we'll cancel this retrospective because we're very, very busy. So we'll cancel it 2 weeks from now or a month from now. We'll do it in 2 sprints or 4 sprints, right? That's a mistake, because a retrospective is where you learn how to work together and to improve. What's a drunken retrospective? We meet and we say, oh, this is not working, let's fix it. So number one, if you know what's not working and you're going to fix it, this is not a retrospective. This is operations. Just do it. Retrospective is the opportunity to learn together to solve something complex, but you might not be able to solve it overnight. Important, right? If you already know what needs to be improved, just improve it. It's not retrospective. Now, the next thing about retrospectives, if you keep on jumping from idea to idea to idea to idea, it's like being a drunk. You'll never really improve something long term. So what I like about the book is that it gives you the improvement Kata pattern. It says you need to identify in your retrospective your target condition. And that's a question. You go to the team and say, hey, team, where do you want to be 3 to 6 months from now? That's a very powerful question. I work with liberating structures. That's a wicked question, right? We're here now. Where do we want to be in 3 months? Use that with your team the next time you meet with them, and as a team member, as a Scrum Master, as a coach. Ask them, where do we want to be 3 months from now as a team? And now align your perspectives to that target condition, because you'll probably get into some obstacles, right? Obstacles are good. If you don't know how to solve something, it's a good thing. It means that you need to put your brain power to solve it within your limits. And then you might use 15% solutions, and another one of liberating structure that you can watch on my YouTube channel. So slow toward a target condition, right? Look at the current condition, and then what's the next target condition? The improvement kata is a pattern that you can use to achieve things you don't know how you're going to achieve. That's good that don't know how you're going to achieve it. It's a good thing. It's not a bad thing, because then you pull your minds, your great minds together, our great minds, and we think about how can we solve this. So this is crucial. I talk a lot about this on my YouTube channel recently, because I've noticed that remote teams need the power of liberating structures. And if you don't know what liberating structure is, just look it up. And remote liberating structures is powerful. Now that many of us are working in remote or hybrid environments, we need to learn how to run micro practices to improve remote teams and hybrid teams. So figure out these patterns that I'm talking about: impromptu networking, I'm talking about 1, 2, 4 all, wicked questions, and all that good stuff, remote cafe, 15% solutions, and I'll keep recording and uploading those, because in order for the team to improve well, you need to create the structure, the process for improvement that's inside out. Because if you have a meeting, a retro, 15 people or 10 people for an hour, and you're all in the same room, and you just go, oh, let's create a column of what's going well, another column for what we need to keep, to stop, to continue, and you all talk, all everyone together, it's not very conducive for improvement. People need a structure for improvement, and liberating structures do provide that. So I highly recommend that you look up liberating structure, either my own there that I'm uploading or anyone else's. It's not my invention. There's an app called Liberating Structures. You need to think about soakability as you work with your teams in a remote setting. It's a different environment for improvement. All right, so let's summarize soakability. What are telltale signs of soakability? Everybody just saying, let's do Scrum and management is waterfall, not soakable. It's really about us, right? That leadership, everyone is agile. Now there is this movement, oh, let's do OKRs, right? Because it worked for Intel and it worked for Google. So copying these best practices is not soakable. We need to cultivate what we call a curiosity-driven culture, where we want to learn what works for us rather than copy other people, because other people's solutions are solving problems that they might have. And we can have the same problems, but it's not the same solution that would work for us. And it's not soakable if we're trying to drive change from the outside in. It's soakable when people say, oh, this is interesting, let's do this. And it's on us to create soakability, to create that curiosity. People are curious if we just give them the process and give them the mechanism for learning. We all like to learn. We just need to create the environment and the patterns for us to learn together. So a few words, and then maybe there's some questions I'm happy to answer. Why is Agile like Dragon go up Lafayette, New Hampshire? It's the biggest mountain here. There's not a lot of mountains in the northeast of the US. It's the second highest here in the area. It's really about, when I help clients, I focus on, let's do something, let's learn fast, let's enable the flow of work, and let's work together, right? Between us and between the teams, in order to have things soakable. So I want to stop here now when I talked about simplicity, scalability, and soakability, and I have like 2-3 minutes. And Inga, if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to take a few questions within the time that we have.
There are questions. Okay, so I want to thank you for a really nice presentation. And the topic was, for me especially, very interesting, because from what you said, I've heard a lot of things that are happening in my concentration, my previous experience. That's very common, actually. So let's move to the questions. We have Audrona who's asking you, from your experience when scaling Agile, what are the usual traps organizations fall into when they plan their communication?
They don't answer the question, how should it look like? They're just saying, we don't like what it's working now, but they don't answer the question, what would it look like a year from now? They don't paint the picture of the future. And that's the biggest obstacle out there. They don't understand what it's going to look like. They just say, oh, let's do this, and it's going to work.
Yeah, I also have a question from my side. You've been saying a bit about, for example, like project managers or Scrum Masters being in a slightly different, let's say, role than they're supposed to be, right? So that they are just managing JIRAs or that's also kind of very common. So where do you think the change should start? So let's say we have an organization that is currently working as they think is, well, maybe not the best way. Maybe they want to improve. Where to start? I'm coming to work, and then what?
That's a great question. I love it. And I had the opportunity to coach a Scrum Master just for that. I think we need to understand what the problem is to solve it. The problem is the Scrum Masters think that they own the improvement for the team. that they're protecting the team, that theirs should be the buffer to the team, and there couldn't be anything more wrong. Actually, Scrum Masters should create a set of questions. And I was teaching that Scrum Master to start asking wicked questions for the team and let the team take ownership. I think the biggest mistake is that we think Scrum Masters still have the project manager task-oriented thinking, as they don't let the team shine. And how do they do that? By start asking wicked questions for the team and elevate the team to the position rather than answering for the team, if that makes sense. Because otherwise they'll just be taskmaster. They won't move the team forward.
Yeah. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Anybody, just feel free to ask. Yes.
Yeah, I added one more in the chat.
Okay, let me read. Okay, so it's again Ludrana asking you, saying thank you. And I don't know, what do you think when an organization is making a decision to mix Scrum and Lean together and build ways of working of their own? Have you seen some examples in real life?
So first, before people are leaving, feel free to connect on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to answer questions there. Feel free to connect on YouTube and watch the videos. I'm more than happy to relate there. And I do a session on liberating structures in a while. If you want more information, just shoot me a message. I'm doing one in Poland and one in Lithuania in a while. I think so. Answering the question, what I'm saying is that we get hung up on the mechanisms and the names rather than asking ourselves, what are we seeing as a problem and what we want to solve together? What does a solution look like? Where do we want to be? Because then we say, oh, but this is Lean. Oh, but this is Agile. Oh, but this is this. This is it's our need to connect to a name, and I think that stands in our way many times. It also stands in the way of where people are saying we're doing scaled Agile. Oh, you're doing scaled Agile, it's bad. Or you're doing scaled Agile, it's good. No, you can't do Lean and this together. It doesn't really matter. The question is, where do you want to be, and what are the principles that would guide you to get there? I think that's the essence of what we want to achieve, and we want to move away from our need to label it. Right? Oh, this is you're doing something for scaled Agile. Oh, you're bad. Why do you call it PI planning? Maybe because PI planning is a good name and we can use it, right? We'll tweak it. So I think the labeling is many times a big problem for us in the way. Thanks for asking. I hope this answers the question. Do we have any other questions, or are we over time?
No, we're not over time. We still have 3 minutes for you. So I'll probably add one more. So we've been talking a bit about the cultural things. They just touched it a bit about all the stress and so on. So maybe you could point out a bit more. How do you think culture should change in the organization, and where to start again? The same, like not only from the operational level, but from the cultural point of view.
My favorite book is a recent book by Andersen, the guy from the Horvitz Andersen. He wrote the book. Culture is what you do. People talk a lot about culture. At the end of the day, what is culture? Culture is the behaviors that people do. So my daughter asking me something about high school, and I said, don't listen to what people are saying. Just look at what they're doing, because people can say whatever they want, right? So it's what we do. And if an organization wants to change their culture, it's very easy. You just need to do things in the way you really think they should be done. Right. So it's like the proverbial executive saying, from now on, we all need to trust each other. And the next day they do and backstab someone. Right. They do something politically very evil. And I think we see now playing out, as an example of Facebook. Facebook is a great example, right? Facebook is saying blah, 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 trust, blah, blah. We do all this. But when you look at what actual doing, you see there's a big change. And now Facebook employees are running into an issue because they keep saying, Facebook keeps saying, but you see that the action that Facebook is doing is very, very far away. So if you want from what they're saying they're doing, right? So culture is how we behave. Culture is what we behave and how we behave. So if you want to change culture, think about the behavior you're having now. For example, the Scrum Master is a Jira admin. Then they're just a project manager. How do you change that? You meet 7 Scrum Masters who are passionate about this, or maybe you have only 5, or maybe you have 50, and you sit down and you say, how do we change our behavior? right? And that's very profound, but it's very powerful. If 10 Scrum Masters decide from now we're going to change our behavior and we're going to do one small thing differently, remember, not 15, start simple and then scale it, right? One small thing as Scrum Master from now on, all of us agree that we're going to do this instead of this. This has profound impact to the organization because it's not talking about Agile, it's actually doing something different. You don't have to call it Agile, you just have to call it the Scrum Master. We want a different culture, and this is in that culture, this is what we'll do. If all your Scrum Masters adopt one liberating structure practice, such as impromptu networking for a team, and they start every retrospective with just one question and impromptu networking, that will have a ripple effect, a huge ripple effect in the organization. You won't believe the impact it's going to have. One small practice differently, all Scrum Masters agree to, that's a behavioral change.
Yeah, I have one last question from Yadra. So regarding the picture in future, how communication should look like, and what about agile organization picture? How to imagine something if you didn't experience it yet and don't know how to start and where to go?
So that's a great question. I guess it relates here. So it is easier to think about where we want to be if it's small time frames, 3 to 6 months. But you're right. This is where we need to innovate with the team, to start asking, hey, we want to get there with the team. Okay, maybe it's we want to do, now we have weekly check-ins. People don't check in the code. They keep it outside on a branch for 14 to 28 days. That's not a good practice. Okay, how do we make sure that people do it daily? That's where we want to be from 6 months from now. Now, we try to solve it for the team. That's not what we want to do. We want the team to solve it for themselves. So we need to create it, and we need, first of all, the team to agree that that's where they want to be. I don't want to impose my thinking. We need to have someone from the team say, hey, maybe we want to, and then we need to start thinking about small experiments to get there. I don't know what the experiments are. The team knows what they are. I can't, as an outside person, a Scrum Master, if I don't do development, I can't solve it for the team. I can ask them to be, I can make them curious about that. I can make them research that. I can ask them to research that by posing tough questions, right? I'm not going to tell them from now on, they're going to do, everyone's going to do one day, and one day everyone has need to merge their branches back, right? That wouldn't work. That wouldn't work. So the role for us for change evangelists is to create a hunger for the team to get to that target condition, to identify the target condition. That's our role, not to manage Jira, not to put meetings on calendars. That's waste. It's create the structure for the team to be hungry because people want to improve. We need to create a structure for improvement. We need to ask them, where do we want to be? How will that look like? Right? We need to create that image for them, to help them create that image. And then if they don't know, help them in small teams of 2 and 4 and start thinking about experiments and getting feedback. So I know I'm out of time here and I see her eyes there. Inga, so I'll stop because I'm very passionate about this. Feel free to reach out on LinkedIn.
We could talk forever with you, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm more than happy to answer.
Yeah, so thank you, Michael, a lot.